The psychology of people who fake their lifestyle. Have you ever scrolled through someone's social media and felt something strange, not envy, exactly, but something closer to unease? The vacation photos are too perfect, the captions too rehearsed, the smile in every image holds the same careful angle, the same practiced intensity. And somewhere in your gut, you feel it. This isn't real, this is a performance. But here's what unsettles you even more, you recognize something of yourself in it. We live in an era of curation. Everyone presents a version of themselves to the world. But there's a difference between selecting what to share and constructing an entirely fictional existence. There's a difference between privacy and pretense. Some people don't just highlight the good parts of their lives. Some people don't just highlight the good parts of their lives, they fabricate an entirely different reality. The apartment they don't live in, the relationship that isn't theirs, the lifestyle they're drowning trying to maintain the illusion of. And before we judge, before we dismiss them as shallow or narcissistic, let me tell you something. Lifestyle fabrication is almost never about the lifestyle itself. It's about a wound so deep, so unacknowledged, that the person would rather live a lie than face what's true. They're not showing off, they're disappearing. Let's start with what's actually happening psychologically when someone constructs a false life narrative. This isn't simply lying, it's something more complex, more painful. Psychologists call this impression management, taken to an extreme, a term that describes how we control the information others receive about us. We all do this, to some degree. You dress differently for a job interview than you do for the grocery store. You might not share every detail of your life with acquaintances. That's normal, adaptive even. But when impression management becomes your entire identity, when the managed impression replaces the authentic self entirely, something has fractured. Research in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows that chronic self-presentation discrepancy, the gap between who you are and who you present yourself to be, creates what researchers call identity strain. Your brain is constantly monitoring two parallel realities, the life you are actually living and the life you are pretending to live. This cognitive load is exhausting. It's like running two operating systems on a single computer. Eventually, something crashes. But here is what most people don't understand. The person creating the fake lifestyle isn't delusional. They know it's not real. That's what makes it so tragic. They're fully aware they're performing. They're just convinced that the performance is more valuable, more lovable, more worthy of existence than who they actually are. Think about this. The fabrication usually begins in adolescence or early adulthood, periods of intense identity formation. Something happens during these years. Maybe it's a parent who only praised achievements, never presence. Maybe it's bullying that taught them their authentic self was wrong, unacceptable, something to hide. Maybe it's growing up in an environment where love was conditional, where acceptance had to be earned through performance. Dr. Alice Miller, a psychologist who specialized in childhood development, wrote extensively about what she called the drama of the gifted child, children who learn early that their true feelings, their authentic needs, are unwelcome. These children don't grow out of hiding, they just get better at it. They become adults who instinctively know, my real self will not be enough, so they build something else, something shinier, something they believe the world will actually want. The false lifestyle isn't built from vanity, it's built from terror. Let me take you back to where this begins. Not to blame parents or assign fault, but to understand, because understanding is how we dismantle shame. Picture a child, maybe 5, maybe 7, who brings home a drawing from school. The child is proud, the drawing is messy, chaotic, full of colors that don't quite stay in the lines. The child shows their parent, and the parent says, without looking up, "That's nice, sweetie. Did you finish your homework?" Or worse, "Why didn't you use more realistic colors?" Trees aren't purple. It's a small moment, forgettable even, but the child internalizes something profound. My joy isn't interesting. My creation isn't valuable. What matters is productivity. What matters is getting it right. Over time, these moments accumulate. The child learns that excitement about small pleasures, a dandelion, a puddle, a story they invented, is met with disinterest or correction. But achievements, test scores, awards, those get attention, those get approval. those get love, or the closest approximation to love the child can access. Psychologists call this conditional positive regard, a concept from Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology. It means, I will value you if you meet my conditions. The opposite, unconditional positive regard, is accepting someone fully, messiness included. Without that foundation, children grow up believing their worth is performance-based. Not being-based, not existence-based, performance-based. Now fast forward. This child becomes an adult. They've internalized the message that who they are isn't enough, but what they achieve might be. So they achieve, or when achievement feels impossible, they fake it. Because the alternative, being seen as they actually are, feels like annihilation. A study in developmental psychology found that children who experience emotional neglect, not the dramatic kind we see in movies, but the quiet kind, the absence of attunement, the lack of emotional mirroring, develop what researchers call a false self-system. This isn't conscious deception, it's survival. The child adapts by becoming what gets response, what generates connection, even if that connection is based on a fiction. And here's where it gets devastating. The false self works. It gets attention, it gets likes, it gets the appearance of admiration, and so it's reinforced again and again until the person can no longer remember what the real self even looked like. So what does this look like in adult life? How does the psychology of lifestyle fabrication manifest day to day? You might know someone like this, or you might be someone like this. They rent a luxury car for a day just to photograph themselves in it. They post from restaurants they can't afford, then eat ramen for the next 2 weeks. They name drop connections they don't actually have. They angle their phone camera to hide the chaos of their actual apartment while posing in the one clean corner. They talk about opportunities that haven't materialized, relationships that aren't quite what they claim, accomplishments that are exaggerated beyond recognition. But here's the truth, they're not enjoying any of it. The rented car doesn't feel thrilling, it feels like evidence they'll need to produce again next time to maintain consistency. The expensive meal tastes like anxiety. The performance isn't fun, it's labor, exhausting, relentless labor. And yet they can't stop, because stopping would mean being seen as they actually are. And they've spent so long building the false structure that the foundation beneath it, the real person, feels too small, too inadequate, too fundamentally worthless to be visible. Think about what happens in their relationships. Intimacy becomes impossible. Because intimacy requires truth, and truth is precisely what they're hiding. So their connections remain surface level. They accumulate followers, not friends. They generate likes, not love. And they feel increasingly hollow inside the very performance that was supposed to make them feel seen. You might see them struggle to be genuinely happy for others, because someone else's authentic success highlights the artifice of their own. You might notice they change stories, contradict themselves, get defensive when questioned, not because they're careless, but because maintaining a false narrative is cognitively taxing. Memory researchers call this the liar's burden, the increased cognitive load required to keep track of fabrications. They might isolate themselves from people who knew them before the performance began. Old friends become threatening because they remember the truth. Family gatherings feel unbearable because families have receipts, memories, evidence of who you actually were before you decided that person wasn't enough. And the irony, the terrible aching irony, is that the parts of themselves they are hiding are often the very parts that would generate genuine connection if shared. Their struggles, their fears, their ordinariness. Because we don't connect with perfection, we connect with humanity, but they don't know this, or they can't trust it. So they keep performing. The quiet person who's exhausted from pretending to be extroverted, the person drowning in debt while posting luxury vacation photos, the person whose relationship is crumbling while they post anniversary tributes filled with adjectives that don't match their actual feelings. They might feel contempt for themselves even as they press post. But the alternative, being invisible, being seen as unimpressive, being ordinary, feels worse than the self-betrayal. Now let's talk about how social media has turned this psychological pattern into an epidemic. Previous generations could fake it in limited ways. You could exaggerate at parties, you could wear clothes you couldn't afford, but you couldn't construct an entire parallel reality and broadcast it to thousands of people daily. Technology has given us the tools to build elaborate fictional lives with unprecedented ease. Instagram is a museum of false selves. TikTok is a theater of performed authenticity, people faking casualness, people staging spontaneous moments, people pretending their heavily rehearsed content just happened naturally. LinkedIn has become a platform for humble bragging and fabricated achievements. Everyone is curating, everyone is filtering, everyone is presenting a version of themselves that is just polished enough to be aspirational but just relatable enough to seem real. But here's where it gets interesting. Research from the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that the more time people spend on social media, the greater the discrepancy between their actual self-concept and their ideal self-concept. In other words, social media doesn't just reflect our insecurities, it actively widens the gap between who we are and who we wish we were. And for people already prone to lifestyle fabrication, social media is gasoline on a fire, because now the performance isn't just social, it's monetizable. It's quantifiable. The validation comes in numbers, likes, followers, comments, shares, and numbers are addictive. They provide a dopamine hit that temporarily soothes the aching insecurity beneath the performance, except the soothing never lasts. Because external validation, by definition, is external. It has to be continuously replenished. You post, you get likes, you feel momentarily better, then you need to post again. It is not unlike substance addiction. The brain gets used to the dopamine spike and requires increasing amounts to achieve the same effect. So the fabrications escalate, the lifestyle gets more extravagant. The lies get bigger, the gap between reality and performance widens until it becomes a chasm the person doesn't know how to cross. And yet, here's the paradox. Even as they get more followers, they feel more alone because nobody knows them. The attention is aimed at the fiction, not the person. They're simultaneously hypervisible and completely unseen. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if you have spent so long being someone else that you can no longer locate your authentic self? What if the mask has been on so long that removing it would reveal nothing? Or worse, something you're convinced is unmovable?" This is the existential crisis at the heart of lifestyle fabrication. It's not really about the lifestyle, it's about existence itself. It's about the fundamental question, am I acceptable as I am? And the person fabricating their life has already answered that question. No, I am not. So they create an alternative. They become a living fiction, and in doing so, they exile their true self so completely that they sometimes forget it existed at all. There is a concept in psychology called the looking glass self, the idea that we come to see ourselves through the eyes of others. Our identity is, in part, a social construction. We become who others reflect back to us. But what happens when the reflection is based on a lie? When everyone is responding to the performance, not the person, you fracture. You exist in a state of perpetual dissociation. The real you is buried so deep that even you can't access it. And the performed you, the one getting all the attention, feels hollow because you know it's not real. You're getting validation for someone who doesn't exist. Which means you, the actual you, are still receiving nothing. Jung also spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject and hide, the aspects we deem unacceptable. The person fabricating their lifestyle is living almost entirely in shadow. They've rejected their authentic self so completely that it's become unconscious, inaccessible. And the more they reject it, the more power it gains in the darkness, the more it haunts them, the more exhausting the performance becomes. Because here is what they do and realize. The effort required to maintain the false self is far greater than the courage required to show the real one. But they can't see that yet. The wound is too deep. The fear is too great. The belief that their authentic self is worthless is too entrenched. So how does someone trapped in this pattern find their way out? How do you stop performing when performance is the only way you've ever known to be seen? There's no simple answer, no 5-step program, no hack, but there is a beginning, and it starts with witnessing, not changing, not fixing, just witnessing. Seeing yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time, acknowledging the wound without shame, recognizing that the performance was survival, not sin. Healing begins when you can sit with the question, who would I be if no one was watching? What would I want if there were no likes, no followers, no external validation at all? The question might terrify you because you might not know the answer. You might have spent so long being the curated version that the authentic version feels like a stranger, but that stranger is still there. Buried, maybe, quieted, certainly, but there, and the journey back to them starts with small acts of truth. You might begin by posting something unfiltered, not because it's performatively authentic, which has become its own kind of performance, but because it's actually true. Or maybe you don't post at all. Maybe you practice existing without announcing your existence. Maybe you have a conversation where you resist the urge to exaggerate. Maybe you let yourself be ordinary in front of someone and notice that they don't leave. Research on therapeutic approaches to identity disturbance shows that reconnecting with the authentic self requires what psychologists call self-compassion, not self-esteem that's still tied to achievement, self-compassion. The ability to hold your humanness gently, to acknowledge that you developed these patterns for a reason, that you were doing the best you could with what you knew, that the performance wasn't vanity, it was protection. You might need to grieve, because letting go of the false self means mourning all the energy you poured into it, all the years you spent being someone else, all the connections you lost because they were based on fiction rather than truth. That grief is real, it deserves space, and you might need to get angry at the systems that taught you your worth was conditional, at the culture that rewards performance and punishes vulnerability, at the technology that turned human connection into a numbers game. That anger is valid. Use it as fuel for change. The healing isn't linear. Some days you'll catch yourself slipping back into performance. You'll feel the urge to curate, to hide, to present the shiny version instead of the true one. That's okay, patterns built over decades don't dissolve overnight. What matters is that you notice, that you witness yourself without judgment, that you choose, even in small moments, to be seen as you actually are. And here's what you might discover. The people who matter don't need the performance. In fact, they're exhausted by it too. They're hungry for realness in a world saturated with artifice. Your vulnerability won't repel them, it will relieve them. Because it gives them permission to stop performing too. You never had to be extraordinary to be worthy of love. You just had to be you, the real you, the messy, uncertain, perfectly imperfect you. That was always enough. You just didn't know it yet, but you can learn it now. And this time, you get to build a life based on truth instead of terror. You get to exist without apology. You get to be seen, really seen for who you actually are. And maybe, for the first time, you'll realize that person was worth knowing all along.